So welcome to part 2 of chapter 7 of the video supporting my iOS developer's book for absolute beginners. In this chapter we're going to be looking at the slider control and how to build a simple application that uses the slider control. So I'm just going to use Xcode to create a new single view application. This single view application I'm going to call slider control test. Going to leave organization name and company identifier as they are. Make sure that class prefix is empty and that the device is iPhone. Press next and you'll be taken to where you're going to store the code. I'm putting it on the desktop and making sure that the create git repository box is unchecked. When I press create, the project is created for me. And as before, we're just going to edit the main.storyboard to create our UI. The slider control we can find in the controls palette by typing slider, and the slider control appears, and then we can just drag and drop it and use the guidelines to space it out nicely on our screen. Something like this. In addition to that, I'm going to add a label. So I just search for label. I get my label and then I can just, whoops, I think I put 2. I'll get my label and then just place that somewhere nearby and also reasonably sized. So that's my UI. In the next step I'm going to wire it up with my outlets and my actions that I want for just creating this simple application. So to do that, I'm just going to hide the sidebar, open the assistant, and make sure that the assistant is on viewcontroller.h. So how this would work is I would set up an outlet for the label because I want to refer to the label in code. I would set up an outlet for the slider because I want to be able to refer to the slider to get its value in code. And I'd also set up an action on the slider so whenever the value changes, an event will get fired. The event of a value changing will get fired and that will call an action function. So if I control drag the label and create an outlet, I'm just going to call that LBL output. I'm going to control drag the slider and create an outlet, and I'm just going to call that SLD slider, something like that. And I'm also going to control drag the slider, and I'm going to create an action. I'm going to call the action slider value changed, and the event that triggers this is the value changed event. There are a number of events available on the slider, but value changed is probably the one that you'll use most often. So now I've set up my outlets, I've set up my actions, I've defined my UI, so it's time to go into the code. So now in my code, you'll see I have the function slider value changed has been created. So what are you going to do? Well, you want to change the value of the slider to text so that you can render it in the label. The slider actually returns what's called a float, and a float is a floating point value, so it's a number with a decimal point and a number of digits after that. So how to convert a floating point value to a string, which the label would use, is you use something called string with format on your NS string. So NS string, I'm going to call it star value, equals. I want to create a new NS string, and I'm going to create that using string with format. So string with format will allow me to convert something to a string. And I do that using what's called format characters. So the %f is the character that defines a floating point value, f for floating. And I put that in a string, and then I just pass a parameter to that, which is my SLD slider dot value. Let me resize this window so the code is all in one line. So what has actually happened here is that I'm creating a new string, and this is my string. And the only thing that's in the string is dictated by %f, and the first value after this NS string, after the comma after this NS string, would be then loaded into that %f. So for example, if I had 2 of them, I could say %f, comma, %f, and then here slider value dot value, and then some other f, some other float. And then the string would look like the first floating value with a comma and the second floating value, or it could be and something along those lines, or hello. The idea is that %f determines where in the string that the value is going to get inserted. But we just want to have a string with that value in it, so our string just says %f. So now that I have a string with the value of the slider, all I have to do is set LBL output. I can never spell it. Output.text equals value. So if I run my app, here it is. I haven't initialized my label, it was just set as label, but as I move this, we see the value, and it goes from 0 to 1. It's a normalized value, so For example, brightness of your screen, you might be familiar with using something like this. dark all the way up to bright, or some other SLID value, and you can see it very, very precise. It's up to 6 decimal places, and you can round that up and down if you decide, but it'll return that value to you. So that's how to use a slider. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward. Hopefully you found it useful. And in the next video, next part of this chapter, we'll take a look at the switch control.